which is a full-line record store, which means they have a very large inventory. In fact, a complete inventory of all kinds of music that you might be interested in hearing on records. Progressive rock, they have classical music too. They have easy listening. And yes, friends, even country and western records too, and disc records. They also have a complete line of the 8-track tapes and the cassettes. And they have 3 locations for your convenience. There's one in Alameda Mall, there's one in Northwest Mall, and they have a brand new location in the Post Oak Galleria that you ought to go by and see when you're out that way. So keep them in mind, and remember that they brought this to you tonight, and be nice to them. Disc Records, full-line record store with a complete inventory of all kinds of music and 8-track tapes and cassettes and everything. Alameda Mall, Northwest Mall, and Post Oak Galleria. And thank you, buddies, for bringing it to us tonight. Elton John. Don McLean, next Tuesday night at 9. And while you're out at the shopping centers and the recording stores, you know, you might just bump into old Weaver Morrow out there wheeling around his new kid and his little rubber baby buggy bumpers. No, in his little baby buggy. Weaver, by the way, will be back tomorrow morning. He's been out for a couple of days while he became a father. And his wife gave birth to a little girl it was Monday night, wasn't it, after 27 hours in labor. Well, anyway, everything is okay, and soon you'll be seeing him pushing the little kid around about 5 o'clock in the morning, give him a little walk before he has to come to work. Weaver will be back in the morning, by the way, from 6:20 to 10:20 is regular time here on KAUM. And what we have coming up next is a rebroadcast of the documentary They Bombed in Houston, which was originally broadcast last Wednesday night. And after that, I'll be back for a little while, and then Ed Beecham will be in. He's getting a whole hour off tonight. How about that? It's 23 minutes before 11 o'clock. And the following is a KAUM documentary.
We always destroy that which we don't like, and that goes for people, for ideas, yes, and for Pacifica Radio.
Pacifica Radio's transmitter, May 12, 1970, and the offices of underground newspaper Space City, July 1969.
There were 2 people there, and a concussion bomb was thrown in through a broken pane in the door. Shattered windows, and all the windows in the front room, and some of the windows in the back room, and left a lot of smoke and glass, destroyed the door.
Or the Family Hand Restaurant, June 1970.
It was called a firebombing by the police. It was like a Molotov cocktail. And they threw it at the front doors, and it broke one of the glasses.
Labor Day, 1970.
It blew out the front door this time instead of just breaking the glass.
And then there's the Pagan Church, December 20th, 1970. The General Store, January 2nd, 1971. And most recently, the Forward Times newspaper, January 7th, 1971. Yes, and Pacifica. Again, October 6th, 1970.
Centers in this town cease planting begonias in front of their house because they keep getting dusted with buckshot. A movie theater is burned to the ground. An underground newspaper is dynamited, and no arrests are made, 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 and our transmitter is dynamited once, and no arrests are made, and our transmitter is dynamited twice.
Has been taken to make you aware, therefore forsaken. If you don't care, they will come and
They bombed in Houston in 1969 and in 1970, and 1971 is already off to an explosive start. And they made harassing phone calls, and they hassled underground newspaper vendors, and they slashed the tires of cars parked near an anti-war rally in Herman Park, and they shot at the homes of anti-war spokesmen, and they shot at Gramophonic's record shop in the village, and they shot at Space City, and they didn't get caught. They fired pistols, rifles, and, well, we'll let Vicki Smith of Space City tell that story.
This is the day that Abby was going to speak in the park. We had people guarding the office at night, and this one guy that was watching saw the car of a person that had been identified as a harasser before, saw him drive by, and noticed that he had a large bow gun in his car, in his hand, in the car. So he got on the phone. He was watching out the window, got on the phone, called the police dispatcher, was talking to the police dispatcher at the time, telling him this car is driven by, and he has a bow gun in his car, and he's driving by again, and wow, he just shot an arrow right in the front door. When it lodged in the wall, it went through the plexiglass door, lodged in the wall, we gave it to Abby Hoffman as a souvenir.
If you ever go to Houston, you better not joke, you better not swear, boy, and you better not smoke, 'cause Captain Sawyer's gonna arrest you, and that ain't nice. Say anything about it, they ship you off to Rice. Let the midnight special shine a light on me. Oh, your prison bound.
When Pacifica got to Houston, it found that airing free speech programming here is indeed a gamble. KPFT, resuming programming after spending most of its first year on the air, off the air. The two bombings of Pacifica stand as probably the most flagrant recent acts of repression in Houston. KPFT is one of 4 non-commercial, listener-sponsored radio stations owned by the Pacifica Foundation. The stations offered diverse programming that ranges from the music of Bach to the rhetoric of Rubin. Some programming is radical, and some charge that obscene material has been aired on the stations. This reputation for controversial programming followed Pacifica to Houston, not exactly endearing the station in the hearts of some local residents. Before the station was even on the air, rocks were thrown through the windows of its studios, and pressure was exerted on some Pacifica financial sponsors.
The extreme conservative paper here, the Tribune, has asked repeatedly if we would make public the list of the 2,700 listener sponsors. And those board members whose names were known more than a year ago were the targets of a very vicious letter-writing campaign. There was a major contributor whose name was listed only in a form on file at the Federal Communications Commission, and while she was away on vacation, she got a brick through her front window with a note telling her that it was because she was helping Pacifica.
That was Pacifica station manager Larry Lee. Although Pacifica's first few weeks of broadcasting were marked by a few telephone threats and some negative mentions in the conservative mass media, there was no indication that the station's opponents would resort to dynamite to shut it down. No evidence until the night of May 12, 1970. KPFT was broadcasting Arlo Guthrie singing Alice's Restaurant when its signal dissipated into the white noise of the FM band. Its transmitter had been bombed. The wrecked transmitter was replaced and housed in a supposedly bomb-proof building, and the station went back on the air June 1st. Its programming was a mixture of jazz, folk, classical, and contemporary music. Tapes produced by other Pacifica stations on a potpourri of subjects were played, and there was a daily 1-hour news show in which Pacifica people discussed what was happening in Houston and in the world. There were no serious problems until last October the 6th, when Dorothy Shelley arrived at the studios to sign the station on. Encountering difficulties, she called KPFT chief engineer, Glenn English.
He tried to assist me as much as possible on the phone, and since he couldn't do anything at all, we decided that the best thing to do was go out to the transmitter. Maybe something at the transmitter was broken, or, a button or something had slipped or something. But what was wrong was 15 sticks of dynamite.
Pacifica's transmitter, bombed for the second time. The damage to the transmitter was less than that caused by the first explosion, but the problems were great. Insurance canceled, a new transmitter site to be found. The station went into a street-fighting man, and 1970 was his year. All over the country, bombs shook business buildings, townhouses, and university offices. But in Houston, the Molotov cocktail had a slightly different flavor. It wasn't the Bank of the Southwest, IBM, or the University of Houston which tasted the terror of anarchy. Instead, it was people associated with either the youth culture or dissent. There may be a revolution on the left going on in a lot of places, but it's still just plain old repression in Houston, and the fact that it often takes violent forms is hardly surprising. The activist philosophy of the frontier is widespread: an eye for an eye, a window broken for speaking out against war, and a transmitter dynamited for advocating free speech. Violence. Houston is no longer the murder capital of the country. In fact, last year only 287 people were murdered here. As the Houston Post editorially summed it up, Texas customs and practice make it easier for a murderer to escape punishment than in any other state. Murder and mayhem in the streets of Houston, a city of education, of science and technology, home for the astronauts, and a city of hope for heart transplant patients. Houston, a city that likes to think of itself as sophisticated. It has a symphony, a ballet, an art museum, good restaurants, good theater, and beautiful people. Rich, beautiful people. But Houston, more than anything else, is growth. And for every corporate vice president transferred in from New York, there were hundreds of good old boys from Louisiana, Mississippi, and rural Texas, lured to the space city by its prosperity and jobs. Boomtown, 1960 population, 800,000. 1970 population, 1,200,000. Doyle Neiman of the Space City Collective.
Houston's the kind of town that essentially grew overnight, you know, and there's a large number of people, and I think this is the bulk of the clan that essentially are lower economic scale. They're either in the working class, or they maybe own small stores, very, you know, small businesses, so forth. And these are people that have just come from small town Texas, essentially. You know, lured to the city with the bright lights theory that success and fame and fortune is here. And they get here and find out that in many cases it's not. You know, unemployment is high, particularly for that group of people, because they don't have training, they don't have education, they don't fit into the aerospace, finance, oil company, you know, sort of group that has a lot to do with running Houston. And they come here and they're also thrown into an environment that's really alien to them, that they just can't understand. And so their sort of reaction is to be confused, I think. And the Klan comes along, or for that matter, George Wallace comes along, or Spiro Agnew comes along, and offers them an explanation which, while I don't think it describes any kind of reality, plays upon all their prejudices that come from our culture, the racism, the religious prejudice, you know, the anti-Jewish, anti-Catholic, intellectual, even anti-white collar, you might say, sentiments that are latent in rural culture, particularly rural culture in this country. And it's an answer that seems to make sense. I mean, you know, if there's high taxes, it's because lots of blacks are on welfare. That's not true, but it seems to be true to them, and I think that's why it has a real appeal to them. You know, they're in a sense a people and a culture that are just caught in a situation they just weren't prepared to understand, and are sort of grasping at some kind of answer.
Southern man, better keep your head. Don't forget what your good book said. Southern change gonna come at last. Now your crosses are burning fast. Southern man.
Houston is a hybrid, and to understand it, it's necessary to understand the various influences upon it, the newness and excitement of a city exploding with growth, the tradition of the Wild West, and the deep-seated attitudes and conservatism of Southern man. Two barometers of the sense of the community in Houston are the letters to the editor columns of the two major newspapers. The reader comments are preponderantly conservative and provide insight into why and how repression can be justified. One man wrote the Houston Chronicle to explain his theory on how young people with long hair and beards can be divided into four groups. Picking up the letter with the third paragraph, he said, quote, One group includes youngsters who have gainful jobs and are trying hard to get an education in order to better themselves and serve their country. Unfortunately, this group seems to be a small minority of young people. In another group, the letter writer went on, are the hippies who claim to have withdrawn from society. They refuse to work for a living and advocate free love and sex on the streets. They also started the drug culture, and I believe they are responsible for selling most of the drugs to younger children. The third group, he continued, includes the radicals who are striking, rioting, and demonstrating and trying to destroy the schools. The fourth group takes in those who have graduated from the ranks of school rioters and now have become bombers who have been terrorizing cities, like the Hitler Youth movement before World War II. Now that they have the right to vote, the letter goes on, I believe that we will see a senator or congressman barefooted, with long hair and beard, on the floor of the National Assembly, speaking for passage of legislation to legalize drugs and to reduce sex to the level of a tomcat operating in an alley. Since most of the groups I have described are under 30 years of age, I think perhaps a much wiser choice would have been to raise the voting age to 30. End quote. That was the bulk of a letter printed in the Houston Chronicle last August. Another letter, this one appearing in the Houston Post, commented on the shooting deaths of 4 Kent State students. It said, quote, I have no sympathy for any student who manages to get himself killed while participating in a violent demonstration. End quote. Then there's the letter to the Post commenting on the death of black militant Carl Hampton during a gun battle with Houston police last July. Quote, the Houston police did a good job, but were really not hard enough. End quote. Young people, long hair, differing social views, differing political views. They all add up to the enemy for Houston's self-styled warriors for the ideals of the silent majority. It becomes almost a holy war against the forces of evil, a war that some Houstonians find at least a little bit justifiable.
Do you feel that there's anything about the nature of Houston which would tend to make acts of terrorism and repression like the Pacifica bombings, like the bombings of the Family Hand restaurant and the Space City newspaper? Is there something about Houston which makes it more likely for things to happen? It might tend to encourage acts like this here more than in other parts of the country?
No, sir, I don't think it's just Houston. I think that the general trend and general people across the United States are, you might say that the pendulum is turning back more towards patriotism.
Do you think the Bill of Rights would pass if it were on a ballot in Houston?
No, frankly, I do not think that it would pass at all here in the city of Houston. I think just the words of the first 10 amendments would be utterly foreign to most people in this community, and I think they would probably lay it down as a very subversive document, if you please.
Oh, mister, I ain't no sister. I believe in the Bill of Rights. Come on, don't you certify? Please, I like to wear my hair long. Can there be anything wrong?
The conservative tone of Houston is reflected by its political leadership. The reaction of the city council to legitimate dissent has been a little bit less than enthusiastic. The council came up with a city ordinance outlawing political parades when the Houston Peace Coalition wanted to march through the downtown area. It took a federal court order to enable the anti-war group to demonstrate, which it did, peacefully. And then there's the handbill issue. Last October, the council passed an ordinance that put a fee on leafleting. For example, you'd have to give the city $7,500 for the right to let 5 people distribute 10,000 handbills at only one place during a 5-day period. Any money not used for cleaning up is to be refunded. The handbill ordinance grew out of an attempt by the city to stop the distribution of anti-war leaflets in downtown Houston. Some say the council sets an example, that there's nothing wrong with an honest attempt to discourage unpopular dissent. Perhaps the most common criticism of the city in this area is that it and its police department really don't try to apprehend those responsible for Houston's violent repression. One proponent of this theory is Dr. Jack Dodson, a professor of sociology at the University of Houston.
I would here point to a singular failure on the part of local officials, certainly the city administration, certainly county officials, to exercise the authority and the powers of their office to publicize, to denounce, and to attempt to control, inhibit terror. I'm not suggesting that there has been direct involvement by any officials, but I certainly would argue that there has been minimal expression of outrage, indignation, or even notice of the many terroristic acts that have occurred in Houston during recent years.
And Larry Lee claims that the search for terrorists has been less than intense.
I don't think that the fact that most of the bombs, or all of them, can be identified as coming from the right against the left should stilt in any way the efforts on the part of local officials to solve this problem. As somebody else once put it, moderation in pursuit of justice is no virtue.
Police officials uniformly deny charges of lax enforcement. They say they're close to a solution to several of the acts of terrorism. What's responsible for this repression? Police Chief Herman Short and Officer J.O. Norris say it's related to the bombings and violence across the country. First, Officer Norris.
My theory is that the bombing started after they started someplace else. Usually, when something major occurs in one place, people pick it up all over the country. And we never had any problems in the past up until the last couple of years. Until we started having bombings all over the country and all over the nation, like in Canada.
Chief Short.
The act of bombing itself would probably have a relation, or it may be the result of opinions that people form in hearing about bombings in other areas. In other words, where previously a person may have just gone over there and broken out all the windows. If he had a personal grudge, he may at this point like better the process of setting off some type of explosion.
The chief went on to point out that the Houston police don't even have jurisdiction in the Pacifica blasts. The KPFT transmitter was outside the city limits, and that bombings are really a matter for the fire department.
The investigation of bombing is not the police department's responsibility. It is the responsibility of the arson squad of the fire department. But of course, we are a function of city government, and it is occurring in the city, and we will assist the arson investigators in making investigations of these things, the same as if we had complete responsibility for them. We don't intend for these things to continue if we can help it.
Institutions are a factor shaping the cultural standards of any community. Organizations like the church, schools, social groups, professional groups, vigilante groups. Houston, on the whole, is a church-going community, and the Baptist Church is one of the larger denominations here. Jerry Autry is the outspoken pastor of the Woodridge Baptist Church, and he doesn't particularly care for Pacifica Radio.
They just used filth in certain broadcasts. As I say, trying to reach a particular kind of audience that I think is probably you'd have to be on dope or something to appreciate that kind of stuff. Most preachers would say, cut them right out. I say no. No more than I'm peculiar. Whiskey and prostitution and things of that nature. You don't legislate righteousness. You don't. People are going to get what they want. Air it, and let the people decide what they want to listen to.
Houston schools are another important institution. The city's two universities, Rice and the University of Houston, often are progressive influences, but neither is really a paragon of liberalism. For example, neither admitted black students until the 1960s. As for the public school system, it has yet to integrate to the satisfaction of the federal courts. At some public schools, there's little tolerance for unusual dress or free expression. Teachers are under pressure from parents and others not to go into the instruction of evolution or make any kind of reference to communism that would be favorable. Some say Houston schools are factories for conservative thought, something that will please a lot of parents. And then there's the John Birch Society. The Society bought a full-page ad in the November 19th issue of the Houston Tribune to celebrate its 12th birthday. At the bottom of the page was a list of 49 friends of the Society who paid for the ad. All but one were from Texas, most from the Houston area. The Birch Society operates the American Opinion Bookstore in Houston, and the bookstore sponsors a recorded telephone message called Let Freedom Ring.
Let freedom ring. Rock concerts seem to be increasing in popularity and are often even sponsored by local government and local businesses. Almost everyone recognizes the danger of drug abuse, both to the individual and to society. But few realize the connection between rock music and the so-called folk bands and drugs. If they did, parents and others sympathetic to the desires of teenagers would not be demanding a place for them to congregate in parks or elsewhere to listen to what is innocently termed their music. One has only to read the accounts of the popular rock festivals to become aware of their degrading influence. This is not accidental, for the names of the bands and the lyrics of the songs are highly significant.
Well, I run down most hurriedly and joined the John Birch Society. Got me a secret membership card, started walking off down the road. Oh boy, I'm a real John Bircher now. Look out, you commies.
And yes, Houston also has the Ku Klux Klan. Frank Converse is the imperial wizard of the United Klans of Texas.
Certainly, sir, the Klan stands for Americans first. They stand for the constitutional rights that our forefathers offered us. And if there is any communism or any type of talk that opposes this form of government, then the Klan opposes that.
Well, I looked underneath everything, behind a chair, looking for them reds everywhere. I even looked up my chimney hole, looked down deep inside my toilet bowl. They got away.
Dr. James Clements, former chief editorial writer for the Houston Chronicle and present communications professor at the University of Houston.
In the spectrum of the media, I think there are those who make lots of noises, who go to an ultra conservative to the point of being militant about it in their broadcasts, in their print, and so forth, that just fosters this kind of atmosphere in the community that people do hear it, people do read it, and therefore they're not alarmed when they hear this sort of thing happen.
Where have all our heroes gone? What's come over our...
These young radicals we're talking about are not the only lazy bums who don't want to contribute their share to society. There are those who make it over to the welfare office on a regular basis to pick up that government handout. KIKK has no quarrel with those who need assistance, those too old or too young to work, those who are physically handicapped, those incapable of working. But it's just not fair for working Americans to pay the bills for a man who wouldn't work even if he had a job. Every man or woman in America today can have a job if he wants to work. And with work and desire, any goal can be reached in America. Just as an athlete must put forth that something extra to be a winner, a man must use all his know-how, put forth all the extra effort he can muster if he wants a chance at the brass ring. KIKK suggests that able-bodied welfare recipients be required to do a little honest labor before picking up that welfare check. If nothing else, they could be put to work cleaning up the tons of litter that mar the beauty of this great nation. Litter that the radicals and the man too lazy to work make. If you don't believe it, take a look at his home, his clothes, or his face. They're even dirty. At least taxpayers wouldn't be burdened with having to shell out millions of dollars every year to clean up the litter, then have to pay a bunch of do-nothings for doing nothing, too. Those bitter enemies of the capitalist establishment, those lazy bums who don't want to work for their bread, apparently think socialism is the answer to the ills of this country. KIKK says, take a look around you at the socialistic countries where everything is owned by the state. Try exerting your freedom of speech and freedom of protest in those countries. Try burning down a few buildings. Try rioting against the judicial system. Try getting something for nothing. And then, my lazy radical friends, take another look, a good, long look, at these United States of America, the land of the free, the home of the brave, the capitalist establishment. That's a little of Where Have All Our Heroes Gone, a popular country and western song which is played on radio station KIKK, and the last half of an editorial which was broadcast by KIKK in March of 1970. A recent audience rating survey showed KIKK as one of the stronger radio stations in the Houston area, with more than 250,000 people over 12 years of age listening in an average week. KIKK President Leroy Gloger was interviewed for this documentary but asked not to be quoted. Another conservative voice in the community is the Houston Tribune, which also doesn't have much use for hippies and welfare and spells the word Negro with a small n. Clymer Wright is the publisher.
Probably the political and social climate in Houston is probably better than it is in other parts of the country, from what I've heard and observed. So I would say that, of course, it's the mood of a lot of people throughout the country is prone more to violence today than it ever has been that I can recall. But insofar as Houston being worse than the rest of the country, I think you'd have to say probably the opposite's true. I think there's probably more overall respect probably for law and order here than there is in most cities.
And then there are the Post and the Chronicle, more liberal than the Tribune, yet far from innocent in the eyes of Dr. Clements.
As far as the general mass media, I just found no anger on their part that this deed had happened to a unauthorized, regulated radio station that opens its mic to anybody that wants to speak into it, and does not draw lines of whether they're right or left or conservative or liberal. The mic is open if you have something worthwhile to say, and what you say is not libelous or obscene or an invasion of somebody's privacy. And I did not find that the mass media had any anger about what happened to the Pacifica radio station, and they should have been extremely angry about it. And this goes for the newspapers, this goes for radio, this goes for television. Oh yes, we had editorials, a couple of KAUM editorials in both major newspapers here. We had a couple of statements with regard to the television statement, but no anger, no follow-up on it, no keeping in behind the police department of this community, no keeping in behind and stirring up the fires under the sheriff's department, or the FBI, if you please. It seems they drag their feet almost to the point of being criminally negligent about it. And I don't think that is helpful to a community that wants to hear ideas that may be new to them or with which they can disagree. We're always building walls behind which we hide, and I think the media contributes a great deal to those walls.
The Houston Post, to its credit, has offered a $1,500 reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the people responsible for the Second Pacifica bombing. Yet the same paper in December ran a 3-part series on Houston hippies, packed with all the stereotypes. A Post reporter lived with long hairs in the Montrose Taft area for 5 entire days. During that period, he discovered the first pagan church, nude hippies, sacred speed, and the squalor of abject poverty. Things that match the stereotype images of young people as perceived by some Houstonians. Perhaps many Houstonians. But is this image typical of the people of Pacifica, or Space City, or the Family Hand, or any number of young people who share long hair and denim pants, but little else with the people of the Post series? Generation gaps, culture gaps, political gaps, sociological gaps, call them what you like. Obviously, they're not confined to Houston or to the South. It also would be naive to suggest that the left and the young haven't done their share of stereotyping and name-calling and provoking of their elders. But in 1970, the year they bombed in Houston, the arsenal as well as the acts of repression belonged to the right. There are no simple explanations for this violence. To understand it, we have to look at the national political climate, as well as a number of competing and overlapping local influences. But perhaps the most important question is, where is Houston headed? The Chamber of Commerce predicts that Houston will become one of America's super cities. But can a city grow and prosper when it sometimes is almost at war within itself? Sociologist Jack Dodson.
Because suppression has sort of peaked in the past, I don't think allows us to assume easily or gratuitously that in the 1970s that we can just sit back and wait for better times to arrive where the people who, for whatever reason, do take the law into their own hands in attempting to suppress, in attempting to inhibit actions, speech by those they disagree with, will just go away. There is the specter of serious erosion of democratic processes, democratic institutions. I would not predict the advent of fascism in America. On the other hand, I'm not by any means absolutely certain that it can't happen here.
Like Moses, I have been removed. I have seen the spectre, he has been here too. Let us live in peace.
Elton John, the Border Song. To close the documentary tonight, what you've just heard, the documentary was called They Bombed in Houston, and it was produced by our Public Affairs Department. Well, to get it specifically correct, give credit where credit is due, reported and narrated by Ed Beecham and produced by Randy Covington. They Bombed in Houston. This is the second time we broadcast that. It was first aired last Wednesday night, so this is a rebroadcast, and we expect to put it on the air at least one more time in the near future, undoubtedly. As you probably know, if you pay attention to the news, 3 men have been arrested in connection with the Pacifica bombings, at least in a related development. 3 men were arrested Friday night. They were allegedly on their way to blow up Pacifica stations in Berkeley and Los Angeles, California. And the Pacifica staff here is been somewhat enheartened by these arrests, and they hope that these arrests will lead to a solution to the bombings that have taken place here in Houston, which were chronicled and discussed in the documentary you just heard. Okay, and the 3 men were members of the KKK, and 2 of them were released by the police. So don't you know that made some people very nervous in this town, in parts of this town, in specific areas of this town. Some people probably got very, very nervous about why those people got released. Well, it could be anyway. This is Bruce, and that's going to do it for me tonight. Ed Beecham has had an entire hour of rest, of vacation, but he will be in here immediately following the commercial, which immediately follows my saying, have a good night, everybody.
Jeans West is making history again. Yes, Jeans West is now having its first chain-wide sale ever, and never before has there been a sale like it. Would you believe that most of Jeans West's stock of shirts and pants is now on sale, starting at $2? Well, that's how it is, from $2 up. Everyone can start this year with a brand new wardrobe. Remember, this is the first chain-wide sale in Jeans West history, so that makes you the winners. Almost all of Jeans West's stock of pants and shirts is now on sale, starting at $2 each. Don't miss out. A sale like this happens once in a lifetime. So come on down to Jeans West and do it. The sale doesn't apply to fair trade merchandise. Jeans West, 9228 Buffalo Speedway, open Monday through Saturday, 12 noon till midnight, next door to the Dome Shadows nightclub. And Jeans West at 6128 Village Parkway, off the Rice campus, next to the Art Cinema, open Monday through Friday, from noon till 10 p.m., and Saturdays, 10 a.m. till 10 p.m.
When all the laughter dies in sorrow, and the tears have risen to a flood, when all the wars have found a cause in human wisdom and in blood, do you think they'll cry in sadness? Do you think the eye will blink? Do you think they'll curse the madness? Do you even think they'll think? When all the great galactic systems sigh to a frozen halt in space, do you think there will be some remnant of beauty of the human race? Do you think there will be a vestige, or a sniffle, or a cosmic tear? Do you think a greater thinking thing will give a damn that man was here?
It's 11:30 in Houston, and we sort of expanded our programming ideals from a local level to a national level. When All the Laughter Dies, from the new Chicago album, and it's a poem by Kendra LaSalle's, the guy who did The Box, which you may remember some time ago, the thing about anti-war thing, which he did on the Smothers Brothers show and subsequently recorded and sold 2 million copies or something like this. When All the Laughter Dies, from Kendra LaSalle's via Chicago on their new album, to which we'll be returning shortly. In God We Trust, title track from Don Nix, and his really nice album on Shelter, and Save the Country, the Laura Nero song, Brian Auger and the Trinity, their version of it from Street Noise. This is KAUM in Houston, and this is Ed Beecham with you for another 2 hours and 50 minutes this evening. Sort of continuing in the vein that we have been in for roughly an hour now. There's going to be a bust benefit this coming Sunday at the Texas Rose Cafe. Almost said the Family Hand. You got to watch that. It was the Family Hand. New ownership. Texas Rose Cafe at 2400 Brazos. This coming Sunday there will be 2 shows, one from 4 until 8, one from 8:30 on. And among the people there, the Blue Star Band, Guy Clark, Ginger Valley, Mike Claxton, South, and all sorts of other people. It's only $1 to get in. It is a bust benefit for some of the people over at Switchboard who are under harassment, the latest of such victims, and the benefit is going to be this coming Sunday, again, at the Texas Rose Cafe, 2400 Brazos, from 4 to 8 and from 8:30 on. So you might want to drop by there and help out some people and help yourselves to some good music. Okay, that's Keeping Track from KAUM, trying to keep you up with what's happening around town. And sometimes when you find out what's happening around town, as we did when we put together that documentary, and as we do every day from our newsmen, Dave Lamble and Mike Lee, you feel very much like Nancy Nevins in Sweetwater.